Think. If you suddenly lost your job tonight, would you be able to survive for the next 6 months without borrowing money? Be honest. Most people wouldn't. And this reality is the beginning of this book. This story is not about becoming rich. It is about ending the fear of money. This book does not teach how to become a millionaire overnight, but rather, it teaches how to live peacefully with money. Scott Pape, whom the world knows as the Barefoot Investor, does not talk like a finance guru, but like an ordinary person. He says, if money is not letting you sleep at night, then understand that you are not rich. The greatest specialty of this book is that it starts with habits, not numbers. Scott clearly says, you are not poor because you earn less. You are troubled because you don't have a system for your money. And without a system, even the highest earning person remains in constant tension. This is where the Barefoot system begins. But before that, Scott shows you a bitter truth. He says, most of us get scared looking at money. Fear of looking at the bank balance. Fear of opening the credit card bill. Fear of the loan statement. We think, we'll see next month. I don't have time right now. I'll plan when I have more money. Scott says, this thinking will always keep you poor. Therefore, he gives you the first task. Very simple, but very powerful. Step 1. Look money in the eye. Not today, not tomorrow, right now. Scott says, open all your accounts. Savings, current, credit card, loan. Everything. How much is there? How much do you owe? To whom do you owe it? No judgment, no guilt, just the truth. Because until you see the truth, no change will happen. And this is where most people stop. But Scott does not scare you. He gives you confidence. He says, no matter how much debt you are in, if you follow the system, you will come into control. Then he says a very important thing. Rich people don't think differently. They build different systems. And the foundation of this system is the bucket strategy. But before that, Scott gives another big shock. Credit card, the biggest trap. Scott says, a credit card is not bad, but without a system, it is the most dangerous weapon. He says clearly, if you cannot pay the full bill every month, then you are not running the card. The card is running you. Interest, late fees, minimum due. All of these together are silently eating your future. Scott's rule is very strict. Either the credit card is in your control or cut it up today. There is no middle way. Here he says an interesting thing. He says, rich people don't spend to look rich. Poor people borrow money to look rich. Chasing brands, taking EMIs for status. All of this doesn't make you rich, it just tires you out. And this is where the real thinking of the Barefoot Investor begins. Money should not be for show, it should be for peace of mind. Now Scott gives you a new way of thinking. He says, you don't need a budget. You need automation, because humans are not disciplined, systems are disciplined. And from here, in the next part, he teaches you how to make life easy by creating 4 different bank accounts. This is the turning point, where an ordinary person slowly starts becoming financially fearless. Now Scott Pape puts forward an idea that sounds extremely simple, but has changed the financial lives of millions. He says, the problem of money is not about money, it's about the distribution of money. Most of us put all our earnings into a single bank account. Salary comes in, expenses go out, EMIs are deducted. Sometimes something is saved, sometimes nothing. And at the end of the month, we think, I don't know where the money went. Scott says, this is the biggest mistake. Therefore, he introduces the bucket strategy. That is, dividing money into different buckets. Scott clearly says, if money is not in different places, it will always cause trouble. Bucket 1, daily expenses account. The first bucket is the daily expenses account. The only job of this account is daily expenses, house rent, electricity bill, water, milk, vegetables, petrol, mobile recharge. Scott says, approximately 60% of your income should go into this account. Not more, not less. And the most important rule, never do any saving or investment from this account, because this money is meant to be spent. When there is separate money for spending, there is no guilt. You spend peacefully, and you save peacefully. Bucket 2, splurge account, Mastika account. Now Scott surprises everyone here. He says, you need a separate account for fun. Yes, fun. Movies, dinner, shopping, trips, favorite things. Scott says, if you don't keep yourself happy, you will never stick to saving. In this account, approximately 10% of the money will go. And the most fun part, there is no guilt on this money. If there is money in the splurge account, spend it. If there isn't, then stop. Just that simple rule. Scott says, this is the way to teach yourself discipline without fighting with yourself. Bucket 3, smile account, future happiness. Now comes the third bucket. Scott calls it the smile account. This account is for future happiness. Car upgrade, vacation, marriage, gadgets, dreams. Approximately 10% of the money goes here too. This money is invested, but for the short to medium term. Scott says, if you have nothing to look forward to, then money seems meaningless. The Smile account gives you motivation. It reminds you that money is not just for bills, but for happiness too. Bucket 4, Fire Extinguisher Account. Now comes the most important account. The Fire Extinguisher Account. Scott names it this because it does the work of putting out fires. Credit card debt, personal loan, high-interest EMI. Scott says clearly, first put out the fire, then decorate the house. In this account, put as much money as possible, especially until the high-interest debt is finished. Scott's rule is very clear. Finish the debt before investing, because no investment can beat an 18 to 24% interest loan. Automation, the real magic. Now Scott says the most powerful thing. He says, you don't need strong willpower. You need an automatic system. As soon as the salary arrives, the money should automatically be divided into these 4 accounts. You shouldn't have to do anything. Why? Because humans forget. Systems don't. Scott says, when money is divided automatically, discipline becomes effortless. And from here, a miracle begins. You start saving without thinking. You start spending without guilt. You start planning for the future without fear. Scott says, financial freedom doesn't mean becoming a millionaire. Financial freedom means a peaceful night's sleep regarding money. And the best part of this system, no matter how little you earn, it works. Now that expenses are under control, fun has become guilt-free, the attack on debt has begun. The next question arises, where should the saved money go? This is where the real understanding of investment begins. And in the next part, Scott breaks a very big myth, that investment is for experts. He teaches simple, boring, but powerful investing. Now Scott Pape says something that most people don't like. He says, if investment feels exciting, then understand that you are doing it wrong. Most of us view investment like a movie. Fast money, hot stock, next multi-bagger, secret tip. Scott says, this very thinking keeps you poor. He says plainly, rich people make money in boring ways. No need to understand the market. Scott removes a very big pressure. He says, you don't need to understand the market. No charts, no candles, no news. Why? Because no one can predict the market in the short term. Scott says, if even experts cannot predict the market, then why are we trying? From here, he introduces passive investing. That is, not fighting with the market, but walking with the market. Index funds, the real hero. Scott's favorite word is index funds. He says, index fund means buying the entire market, not picking winners, not fearing losers. Scott explains, when you buy an index fund, you are saying, I believe in the economy. Sometimes the market is up, sometimes it is down. But in the long term, the economy grows. And along with it, your money grows. Scott repeatedly emphasizes, time in the market matters, timing the market doesn't. Compounding, the quietly working magic. Now Scott explains compounding like a story. He says, in the first year, your money will grow a little. In the second year, there will be growth on that increased money too. In the third year, growth upon growth. Scott says, compounding doesn't make noise, it just works. This is the reason why growth seems slow in the beginning. But after a few years, you are shocked. Scott says clearly, the most powerful thing is not the amount, but time. The earlier the start, the bigger the benefit. Risk, don't fear it, understand it. Now Scott talks about risk. He says, risk is not being in the market. Risk is staying out of the market. Inflation silently eats your savings. Money lying in the bank seems safe, but in the long term, it slowly dies. Scott says, don't avoid risk. Manage it. In index funds, there is volatility. The market will fall, you will feel scared. But this is the moment when most people make a mistake. Scott's golden rule. When the market falls, don't run, buy, because you are buying the future at a discount. Dollar cost averaging, the cure for fear. Now Scott gives a practical solution. Dollar cost averaging, meaning invest a fixed amount every month. Whether the market is up or down, you keep investing. What happens because of this? When the market is low, you buy more units. When the market is high, fewer units. Scott says, with this, your emotion gets out of the system. You don't think, you just do. This is the secret of successful investors. Fees, the silent theft. Now Scott shows a hidden enemy. Fees. He says, a 1% fee seems small, but in the long term, it can eat 20% to 30% of your wealth. Scott says plainly, high-fee funds are not for you. They are for the fund manager. Index funds are powerful because the fees are very low. And the money that didn't go into fees compounds for you. Simple plan, strong mind. Scott repeats this again and over. You don't have to look smart. You have to become rich. Simple plan, long-term commitment, emotional control. Scott says, the market doesn't make you rich. Your behavior does. And now that the fear of investing is gone and the system is built, the next question arises. What about the bad days? If the job goes, a health issue arises, an emergency comes. This is where most people break down. And that is why Scott teaches the next most important lesson, the game of emergency and protection. Now, Scott Pape talks about that thing which people consider boring but is the real security, protection. Scott says, before building wealth, learn to save it, because an accident, an illness, a job loss can erase years of hard work. Emergency fund, the foundation of mental peace. Scott first talks about the emergency fund. He says, if you don't have at least 3 to 6 months of expenses kept separately, then you are financially naked. An emergency fund means no investment, no profit, no excitement, just safety. Scott says plainly, an emergency fund doesn't buy money, it buys sleep. When the market falls, jobs are at risk, health issues come, then there is no panic. You don't sell investments out of compulsion. This is the reason that smart people first build an emergency fund, then invest. Insurance, transferring risk. Now Scott brings up another boring but powerful topic, insurance. He says, insurance is not an investment. Insurance is protection, and ignoring protection is the most expensive mistake. Scott especially emphasizes 3 things: health insurance, life insurance, income protection. He says, if your income stops, the whole system stops. The job of insurance is to give the risk of a big trouble to someone else. Scott says, insurance is that roof which you need when the rain has already started. Credit cards, enemy or friend? Now Scott comes to credit cards. He is blunt. He says, credit cards don't make people rich, they make people poor. High interest, minimum payment trap, and a fake lifestyle. Scott gives a clear rule. If you have a credit card, then every month, full payment. Don't give even a single rupee in interest. He says, giving interest means selling the hard work of the future today. Debt snowball, the way out of debt. Now Scott tells a practical way to finish debt. Debt snowball, meaning, start with the smallest debt. Finish it with all your strength. Then the next. Then the next. Scott says, this is not a game of math, but a game of psychology. Small wins give confidence. Confidence builds momentum. Momentum finishes debt. Scott says, debt freedom comes from behavior, not income. Lifestyle inflation, the hidden trap. Now Scott shows a silent killer. Lifestyle inflation. Income increases, expenses also increase. The result? The account remains the same. Scott says, trying to look rich keeps you poor. He gives a simple rule. If income increases, increase savings first. Expenses later. Pay yourself first. Live life with the rest. Financial plan equals stress-free life. Now Scott slowly connects the whole picture. Emergency fund, insurance, low debt, simple investing. All these together create one thing: control. Scott says, when money is in control, then life also comes into control. Now money doesn't cause fear. Decision clarity comes. The future looks clear. But one question remains. Is all of this just a game of numbers? Or is money connected to our thinking, our relationships, and our identity? Scott says, the biggest battle is not in the bank account, but in the mind. And from here, the next part of the story begins: money psychology and the game of values. Now Scott Pape talks about the most sensitive but truest thing. He says, money is never just money. Money is connected to our fears, our upbringing, our memories, and our identity. This is the reason that 2 people, even with the same income, live completely different lives. Money stories running since childhood. Scott says, a story of money is running in all our minds. For some people, money is security. For some, status. For some, freedom. And for some, constant worry. These stories we learned in childhood. What we saw at home became the truth. Scott says, until you recognize your money story, money will continue to control you. The first step is awareness. Comparison. The most poisonous game. Now Scott comes to a dangerous habit. Comparison. Instagram, friends, relatives. Who is ahead? Who is earning the most? Scott says, comparison is the enemy of happiness, because you will always be behind someone or the other. And under that pressure, you take wrong financial decisions. Car on loan, lifestyle on EMI, life in stress. Scott says, the race of your life is only yours. Definition of happiness and enough. Now Scott brings a powerful word. Enough. He asks, how much money is actually enough? And most people never find the answer to this question. Scott says, a person who does not decide what is enough is never satisfied. Being rich is not about earning more. Being rich is about wanting less. Money equals tool, not master. Scott repeats this point over and over. Money is a tool, not the owner. If money is taking the decisions, then you are not free. If you are taking the decisions, then money serves you. Scott says, let money become your slave, not you its slave. This mindset builds real wealth. Relationships and money. Now Scott speaks a real truth. Money doesn't break relationships, it shows the truth. Money issues come from a lack of communication. Scott advises couples, talk about money. Silence is the biggest danger. Make a plan. Align values. Money only works when both are in the same direction. Real meaning of freedom. Now Scott defines freedom. Freedom means not just leaving a job. Freedom means having the option of choice. You work because you want to, not out of compulsion. Scott says, financial freedom is not a one-day event. It is the result of daily habits. Calm mind equals rich life. Now Scott gives the story a peaceful turn. He says, the richest people are the calmest because they have control. Emergency fund, insurance, low debt, simple investing, clear values. All these together create one thing, peace. But now the question is, does this system work in every stage of life? Young age, family, kids, retirement? Scott says, yes. Only the strategy changes. The principles don't. And on this, the next part of the story will be the game of life stages and long-term plans. Now Scott Pape views life in stages. He says, the money plan cannot remain the same when life changes. The mistake happens when we keep applying those same old rules to a new life. Young age, time for foundation. Scott says, when age is low, your biggest asset is your time. In this stage, there is also the most freedom to make mistakes. Scott advises, before chasing a high income, build good habits. Emergency fund, basic insurance, low-cost investing. Spend on learning, not luxury. Scott says, in the early years, it's not important to look smart, but to build a strong foundation. Career growth, the game of control. Now income increases. Promotions, better jobs, side income. Scott gives a warning here. Save yourself from lifestyle inflation. He says, every raise should be for your future freedom, not for today's show-off. In this stage, automatic investing becomes the most powerful tool. As soon as the salary arrives, savings and investing should be deducted. Whatever remains, live life within that. Family stage, balance with responsibility. Now family comes into life. Marriage, kids, big expenses. Scott says, this is where people start to panic. But if there is a right system, the pressure remains manageable. Update insurance. Make the emergency fund bigger. Reduce risk a little, but don't stop investing. Scott says, in the family stage, security and growth go together. Kids and education, not with emotion, with a plan. Scott says clearly, a child's future is secured with a plan, not emotion. Blindly throwing money is not the solution. Clear goals, time horizon, regular investing. Scott says, before making kids rich, make them financially wise. Midlife reality check. Now Scott comes to the most honest stage, midlife. Here people ask themselves, am I in the right direction? Scott says, this is not the time to fear, but the time to adjust. Review the portfolio. Reduce debt. Take retirement seriously. Scott says, midlife is not for panic, but the time for course correction. Retirement, the real form of freedom. Now retirement. Scott says, retirement doesn't mean stopping work. Retirement means ending the worry of money. In this stage, less risk, more stability, but money still continues to work. Scott says, retirement planning is not for the future. It is today's responsibility. One system, different speeds. Now Scott wraps up the whole thing in one line. The principles remain the same. Spend less than you earn. Protect yourself. Invest simply. Control emotions. Only the speed changes. With life. And now, when the whole journey has become clear, one last question remains. Isn't all of this very complicated? Scott says with a smile. No. In reality, money is simple. We are the ones who make it complicated. And from here, the story goes towards its last turn. The essence of simple rules and lifelong discipline. Now Scott Pape brings everything together. He says wealth is not accidental, it is designed. Money works when there are rules made for it. Automation, the shortcut to discipline. Scott says, the smartest people are not those with the most willpower. They are the people who have automated their decisions. Salary arrives, savings are deducted, investments are sent, bills are paid. You don't even have to think about it. Scott says, automation bypasses emotions. When emotions are out, results are stable. The bucket system, making money visible. Now Scott explains his famous system. Buckets. Every dollar has a fixed job. Spending account. Saving account. Investment account. Money doesn't wander aimlessly. Every rupee knows what it has to do. Scott says, confusion wastes money, clarity saves money. Pay yourself first, making yourself the priority. Scott considers this rule sacred. Pay yourself first. Everything else comes later. Why? Because the money that is left over is often zero. Scott says saving doesn't happen from leftovers. You respect your future only when you give it money first. Habits hustle. Now Scott attacks the hustle culture. He says, a 24/7 grind doesn't build wealth. Daily boring habits build wealth. Automatic saving. Low-cost investing. Simple lifestyle. Scott says, to become rich, you don't need to get tired. You need to be consistent. Financial diet, the balance of expenses. Scott compares money to a diet. Crash diets don't work. Extreme frugality doesn't work either. You need balance, enjoyment, as well as saving. Scott says, money runs better with control, not guilt. The long game, a test of patience. Now Scott speaks the final truth. Wealth doesn't come overnight. Those who want to get rich quickly often end up poor quickly. Scott says, slow wealth is real wealth. The market will fall, the news will scare you, friends will make comparisons. But if the system is strong, you will remain calm. Identity shift, the biggest change. Now Scott talks about something deep. More important than what you do is who you believe you are. If you believe you are bad with money, even the system will fail. Scott says you don't just become an investor, you start thinking like an investor. This is the real change. Now the question is not, can I become rich? The question is, can I maintain the discipline? And when the answer is yes, the path ahead opens up on its own. Common mistakes that kill plans. Now Scott Pape comes straight to those mistakes which quietly kill even the best plans. He says, the mistake is not about knowledge. The mistake is about behavior. The search for shortcuts. Scott first shows a common trap. Shortcuts. The desire to get rich quick. Hot tips, secret strategies, sure-shot returns. Scott says, if any shortcut actually worked, it wouldn't remain a secret. A shortcut mindset takes you away from discipline. And without discipline, no system lasts. Getting stuck in market noise. Now Scott talks about market noise. News headlines, expert predictions, daily market drama. Scott says, the louder the market's voice, the more useless it is. People who watch the market every day are more afraid. People who follow the system for years remain calm. Scott says clearly, stop listening to the noise. Trust the plan. Inconsistency, the greatest enemy. Now Scott speaks a painful truth. People start, but they quit in the middle. Investing starts, then the market falls, then fear kicks in, then they stop. Scott says, quitting in investing is the most expensive mistake. The system only works when it is given time. Lifestyle pressure. Now Scott shows societal pressure. Marriage, cars, house, status. Everything is needed immediately. Scott says, walking on someone else's timeline is financial suicide. Every person's situation is different. Your plan is only for you. Overconfidence. After success. Now Scott points out a rare but dangerous mistake. Overconfidence. When a little success is achieved, people start breaking the rules. Extra risk. Big bets. Ego trades. Scott says, wealth demands humility. Those who fight the market lose to the market. Ignoring protection. Now Scott gives a warning. Skipping the emergency fund. Ignoring insurance. These mistakes aren't visible until it's too late. Scott says, protection is boring, but its absence is deadly. One bad decision syndrome. Now Scott mentions one last trap. One big wrong decision. An all-in trade. A guaranteed scheme. Investing borrowed money. Scott says, wealth isn't built by a single smart move, but it can be destroyed by a single stupid move. That's why protection, patience, and limits are necessary. The promise. Now Scott Pape lowers his voice. He doesn't lecture. He talks to you. He says if you can take only one thing from this book, it should be this: control. Control over money, control over fear, control over the future, the commitment. Now Scott wants a promise from you. No dramatic oath. Just a quiet commitment. He says, I will not look for shortcuts. I will not compare myself to others. I will trust my system. I will make boring decisions that work in the long term. Scott says, if you fulfill these four things, wealth becomes inevitable. Boring life, rich life. Now Scott explains a paradox. From the outside, your life will look boring. No flashy cars. No loud success. But from the inside, life will be stable. Less stress, better sleep, stronger relationships. Scott says, real wealth is not loud. The end of fear. Now Scott gets to the root of fear. Fear of the future. Fear of running out of money. Scott says, the system kills fear. Emergency fund. Insurance. Automatic investing. All these things gradually end the fear. Scott says when fear ends, clarity arrives. The true definition of freedom. Now Scott defines freedom in one line. Freedom means you don't have to take every decision out of the fear of money. You can say no. You can wait. You can make a choice. Scott says freedom comes from options, not luxury. Legacy, not just money. Now Scott makes a final emotional point. Wealth doesn't just mean leaving money for children. It's about leaving values, leaving habits, leaving a calm mindset. Scott says your real inheritance is your behavior. One last reminder. Now Scott reminds the reader one last time. You are not special. You are not a genius. And that is your strength, because this system is made for ordinary people. Scott says, you don't need to be smart. You need to be consistent. And here, the story is almost complete. Just one last part remains. A quiet end. A gentle push, where Scott bids you farewell for life. The conclusion. Now Scott Pape slowly closes the story. No big claims, no flashy promises. Just one honest truth. He says money is not the purpose of your life. Money is just a tool that helps you live the life you truly want to live. Scott says, if you don't have a flashy car but you sleep peacefully, then you are rich. If your house is small, but there is no fear, then you are rich. If your income is average but the control is in your hands, then you are rich. Now Scott looks at the reader one last time. He says, you don't have to fix everything today. You don't have to be perfect. Just take one step, a small step that changes your direction. Scott says, open an account today. Set an automatic transfer today. Stop one unnecessary expense today. Just today. Tomorrow, the system will work. He says you don't change your life in one day. You change direction in one day. Now Scott smiles. He says, you are not alone. Mistakes will happen. The market will fall. Life will give surprises. But if there is a system, you will stand up again. Every time. Scott's final message is very simple, and perhaps that is its strength. He says, be calm, be patient, be boring. Because boring people are the ones who win in the end. Now the book ends. No noise. No dramatic music. Just a peaceful realization. That money is no longer a fear. Money is now under control. And life has started feeling a little lighter. If you found this audiobook journey helpful, then please like this video. For more honest, deep, and practical finance books, subscribe to the channel. Tell us in the comments, which one rule from this story are you going to adopt from today? Remember, the journey to becoming rich doesn't start with money. It starts with your mindset. See you again with a new book and a new lesson. Until then, stay calm, stay disciplined, and keep making boring decisions.